and welcome to another program of The Public Interest. I am Malaika Ramsey here with you again this week with leader of the People's National Congress Reform and leader of the opposition, Brigadier the Honorable David Granger. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mike.
Today we focus on women. Now, Guyana joined with the rest of the world a few weeks ago to observe International Women's Day. Of course, women are not only meant to be celebrated and honored on International Women's Day, but throughout our lives. Brigadier David Granger will tell you today about the plight of women, the situation of women in our nation, and the fact that he has and probably knows some of the solutions. Sir, we jump right into it this week. We know the problems women face. Of course, I know it's going to come up in this discussion, but how do we solve, or at least begin the process of solving our women's problems, especially with the help of men? How can men contribute to those solutions?
Malaika, I think the solution has been introduced by the People's National Congress. I would say that the development of women's rights in Guyana went through 4 different stages. You may not know because you might be too young, but there was a time when discrimination against women was almost, you can say, conventional. And from discrimination we moved towards agitation. From agitation we moved towards representation, and from representation to legislation. So I see the struggle for women's rights has moved through 4 stages, and there has been progress. You may not know, again, as I say, but there was a time when women civil servants, nurses, teachers couldn't marry and remain in the job. If they married, they had to leave the job. That was in a colonial time. And our party agitated for change because it was discriminatory. If a man marries, you can't expect him to leave a job. But women civil servants could not, by law, remain in the service. So there were lots of impediments against women in some clubs, sport clubs, for example, and the Georgetown Club. Women were prohibited from sitting with males, or they were prohibited from joining. So the People's National Congress in the post-colonial period had a lot of work to do to remove the barriers, the discrimination against women, and we succeeded in doing that. The second stage was, of course, agitation, and one of the most prominent women in the People's National Congress, Ms. Winifred Gaskin, was one of the founders of something called the Women's Political and Economic Organization, the WPEO. And after that, we established something called the People's National Congress Women's Auxiliary in 1957. And from the PNCWA, we formed the WRSM, the Women's Revolutionary Socialist Movement, and today we have the National Congress of Women. So that has gone through 4 name changes. But again, women like Ms. Winifred Gaskin, Ms. Jane Phillips Gay were always in the forefront, and they agitated for women's rights in the civil service and in the wider society. The result was that, this sounds long-winded, but the result was that in 1976, our government, the People's National Congress government, introduced a state paper on women's equality, and we started to introduce legislation to ensure that women's representation would be irreversible. Women, as you know, became represented. We had the first woman Chief Justice in the Anglophone Caribbean, the first woman Chancellor, well, the same person. We had women pilots, and women started occupying a lot of prominent positions which were previously closed to them. And there was abundant legislation dealing with children born out of wedlock, women's rights within the marriage, and equality. Women must work for the same pay as men if they're doing the same jobs. So there have been 4 stages. And I would say that the People's National Congress Reform now in the National Assembly is committed to continuing that struggle that we initiated over 60 years ago. So the struggle is on.
I'm happy that you said that, the PNC is committed to that struggle and committed to these solutions. Because if I can just take us out a bit from the colonial days, and indeed from listening to you, sir, we have progressed. But really and truly, my question is now, those problems faced in the colonial days and times past for women, they're a bit different now. How do we have quick solutions for the problems that women face today?
My view is that one of the most severe problems facing women today, that is to say the majority of women, is the question of poverty. And the present administration, the People's Progressive Party Civic Administration, does not seem to be aware of the plight of women. If a woman is poor, I think we can see what I call a cycle of hereditary poverty, that particularly if she is a single mother, a single parent, her child or her children are likely to be poor as well. For example, if you're working at an enterprise, I know some people in the security business are working for a little more than $100 an hour, although the law says they should get $140. Some are working for $120 an hour. It means that they take home maybe about $28,000 or $30,000 a month. It is hardly enough to raise, to keep yourself with that sort of money, and much less to raise a child, paying rent, paying utilities, providing snacks to go to school. So I would say the question of poverty is the most pressing against women today. And you will not solve women's problems unless you solve the problem of poverty. Now, two problems are related to that, two additional problems. One is the question of education. In a few days' time, on Monday the 26th, 25th, and Tuesday, Monday and Tuesday, 17,000 children are going to be writing the National Grade 6 examinations. Now, most of them will not get into the top 10 schools. Most of them will go into schools maybe with inadequate furniture, maybe insufficient teachers, and other problems. My fear is that many of them will drop out of school. And if they drop out of school, maybe because of early pregnancy, maybe because they have to stay home to do work to support the family, they will not be able to complete their education. And in Guyana, only 25% of children going to secondary schools actually matriculate. That is, they actually graduate with CSEC, with English and mathematics. Only 25, it means that 75% of all of the children. And among these must be a large number of women, girls, will not graduate from secondary school, will not matriculate from secondary school, and presumably will not enter university. This is what contributes to what I call the cycle of poverty, or and hereditary poverty, because they will get second-rate jobs, and they probably will not be able to accumulate enough money to improve themselves and to live comfortably, to enter the professions, or even to start their own business enterprises. So I consider the problem of poverty very, very serious. And there are a lot of unemployed young women, some of them unfortunately go into the hinterland in search of a few pennyweights of gold, and they get more than they bargained for. When you hear about people trafficking, women are the victims. Sometimes largely indigenous women are the victims. And the point is, poverty affects women of all ethnic groups, African Guyanese, Indian Guyanese, Amerindians as well. And we need to look, and the Partnership for National Unity is examining the problem of poverty. And we hope to call attention to this in the budget debate which starts next week. But poverty is the big problem.
I'm happy you mentioned human trafficking. I want to talk about that, but I'm going to come back to that in a bit. Before I do that, there are a number of organizations, probably non-governmental organizations in Guyana, that should be there to address women's issues and women's needs. And I can remember in May of 2012, you actually met with one of those groups. I think, it's the Women and Gender Equality Commission. Now, in your opinion, have these groups done enough, or are they doing enough to address women's issues, especially our young women?
most of the problems affecting women are structural in origin. For example, an individual may do something to alleviate her poverty, but when you look at the numbers I've been mentioning, for example, the number of students taking National Grade 6 examinations, you can assume that about 8,000 or 9,000 are women. Only the state in this country, only the state has resources that can bring about a significant change. For example, if you want to train more scientists, you need to have schools which are equipped with laboratories. If you want to produce graduates in engineering and other fields, you have to have a university which is properly equipped. And this is not something that an individual could do. This is something that the state has to do, because in Guyana, the state supports the university. And we have problems at that university. We have problems at Sierra Leone College of Education. We have problems at the schools. So there needs to be structural change in the way the state funds and organizes these institutions, which can help to generate employment for women.
Has the opposition done any, because it comes back to, yes, this is not a government or opposition problem. So I'm going to ask this, has the opposition done anything to probably assist or encourage or push government in the direction to address our women's issues?
Well, to the extent that we feel that some of those issues concern education and employment, yes. We have pushed, and right now I've personally met with the University of Ghana Staff Association, the Student Society, and the Workers Association in order to bring about change at the University of Ghana. I have spoken with the graduates of the Sierra Leone College of Education, and I made some recommendations, and I'm glad to see those recommendations are being gradually, maybe grudgingly, fulfilled by the government. For example, I told the trainee teachers that they're entitled to one laptop per teacher. And I noticed in the newspapers that they've started to get laptops. In fact, 2 weeks after I made the announcement last year, they started to get laptops. So the government is paying attention, and that is one of the roles of the opposition, to keep pressure on the government to bring about change in the interests of the people. Yes, I feel it's a better educated population, particularly for women, and there has always been a tendency in some communities for the women to stay at home and do housekeeping. But from the early days of the PNC administration in the 1960s and 70s, women were encouraged to go out and take the same jobs that men were taking. In fact, many of them are doing that now out of necessity. So yes, there's a lot that the opposition has done and will continue to do to make sure that women's education, women's employment, women's empowerment are not put on the back burner by the PPP administration.
You mentioned human trafficking earlier. Now again, it comes back to what opposition has done or what opposition will do. The public has heard it all, and including a word that was used to describe trafficking in persons report a couple of years ago. And I know you're very passionate about this because you always talk about the young girls who are being exploited, especially in our interior locations. Now, has there been any move since all of these pronouncements and, if I can use the ordinary language, screaming at the top of our lungs about human trafficking, has there been any work being done with probably the Human Services Ministry to address what is indeed a problem? This is human trafficking.
Well, there are several dimensions. Number one is the enforcement problem, that people who traffic in persons are committing offenses. Again, the opposition is quite limited in that regard. It is really a police function, and we have been putting a lot of emphasis on public security, and we have called actually for the revocation of the appointment of the Minister of Home Affairs, because we do not feel that enough attention is being paid to this very grave human problem. And we know that young girls are taken into the gold mining areas and timber producing areas on the pretext of giving them jobs as shopkeepers or stewardesses or waitresses. But in fact, some of them are forced into prostitution. They have to escape. In fact, the present chairman of Region 7, Bartica, Mr. Branford, was instrumental in rescuing some girls from I would say, servitude in the hinterland in Region 7. So yes, we have continued to emphasize the importance of public security, of which trafficking in persons is one aspect, human safety. And we have called on the Ministry of Human Services to be more vigilant. The police need to be more vigilant. The police need to be retrained so that they can recognize trafficking, especially in those areas, timber grants, mining areas, and so on. So there is a little that we can do, but what is necessary is an institution with the reach, such as the police force, which will go into those areas and make sure that persons who are trafficking are punished and bring that crime to an end. Right now it's still happening.
We know that it's the problem of women is not only one group, it's not only one group's problem. Let's talk about the religious community. In some sections, the religious communities have been criticized for not doing enough or not speaking out for women's rights. Do you believe that the religious communities have done all that they possibly can, and should they get involved in addressing women's issues?
The battle for women's rights is global and national. It goes beyond religion. I'm a Christian myself, and I do believe that there is, in my Christian body, which is an Anglican body, there is new thinking about women, priests, women's rights, and the way women should be treated. In most congregations I've been to in the Pentecostal churches, I would say that the majority of devotees has always been women. I cannot say what work they do. I presume that churches are engaged in pastoral work, preaching the word that is in the Bible. I don't know how much social work is done, but what I feel that women are concerned with is poverty alleviation, getting good education, good employment, and getting access to some jobs in the economic sector. I cannot say to what extent religious organizations, Islamic, Hindu, or Christian, have been doing that work. I get the impression that a lot of the work is, as I said, pastoral, purely religious, but I do not see them doing the sort of empowerment that I expect. I know there's a lot of relief work. 2 weeks ago, in fact 1 week ago, I was in Lusignan. I met with the family of a person who was killed. In fact, the father was shot in both legs and the son was killed outright during the massacre in Lusignan 5 years ago. And what I would say is that there is a limit to the amount of relief work you can do. In the immediate aftermath of a crisis or a tragedy, people can come along with foodstuffs, funds, and that type of thing. But in the long term, women's status, the condition on which women live can only be modified, can only be altered, can only be improved by structural change in the education system and in employment. I don't see the religious organizations doing that. They involve a lot of religious work. Maybe sometimes there's the meltdown of a family. They may do counseling work. I know there are NGOs like Help and Shelter, but I don't know that other religious organizations are doing the sort of work Help and Shelter is empowered to do. The Salvation Army does a lot of work in drug rehabilitation. I think maybe among religious organizations it's probably unique, or if it's not unique, it's probably doing most work. But on a national scale, I can't say that women have been, the religious organizations have been promoting women's rights very effectively. I may be wrong, but it's simply that I don't know, I can't say.
In the event that you are correct in some sections or in various religions, what do you think can possibly, propel them into doing some more to address women?
Well, for women, I think that apart from the poverty aspect, there's another aspect which must be given consideration. That is the family. And in September 2010, there was a very interesting development in the European Parliament And an Italian MP took her two-month baby into Parliament and started to nurse the baby. Of course, this created quite a stir, because nursing a baby in Parliament is not conventional. But she did that to show the dilemma women face, because women have babies, men don't have babies. And babies have to be nursed, they have to be fed. So if she is a parliamentarian and she has a baby, there is a dilemma. She can't do both jobs. She can't ignore the baby and only do Parliament. She can't, or do the baby alone and ignore Parliament. So there is a dilemma. So what I feel needs to be done is that we have to look at ensuring that we deal with the issues affecting women in that regard and make life more comfortable for them. One of the commitments I gave to women when I spoke to the public servants some time ago is that we must look at something like creches, providing enough creches or daycare centers so women with children can do both. They can ensure their children are looked after and at the same time do their professional jobs, their occupation. So that is an important aspect, to deal with that aspect of the family. And I think that more could be done to make sure the families remain strong. Because if you ever held a baby, you'd see how completely helpless that child is, that baby is. And a baby needs to grow up in a family, not only for nourishment, but also for warmth and tenderness and learning to live, learning rules, learning to love. And the family in Guyana has been weakened because many women who are not living with their spouses or living with the father of their children have to go to work, and this creates a problem for them. And not only a financial problem, but also a problem of supervision. Sometimes children from a very young age grow up without seeing either mother or father for long hours, even when they go to school. If their mother is working at a certain type of job, like a security guard, the child may just see the mother for a few minutes a day, because when the child is sleeping, the mother is working. When the mother is resting, the child is at school. So we have to look at the family in Guyana, and we also have to look at the employment of mothers as well, to ensure that that family is comfortable, with housing, with feeding, and of course the care that children need when they're growing up.
Brigadier, let's talk about the women of themselves and their circumstances. Apart from the everyday issues that affect them, the economics, of course, discrimination, do you believe that it is necessary for there to be a program in the various schools, especially our public school system, to teach girls from a young age what they should accept, what they should not accept, how they should live, how they should conduct themselves as women? I mean, from the school age, a very tender school age.
Well, it is quite clear to me that enough attention has not been paid to the sensitivities of gender relationships, and because of the fact that many institutions have traditionally been dominated by men, governments tend to be male-dominated, corporations tend to be male-dominated, sometimes even the churches tend to be male-dominated in terms of the pastors and so on. And most institutions are still dominated by males. The result is that males do not give sufficient consideration to the representation of women and to women's rights. And this is a problem because young boys, would come into certain situations at school and in the workplace, not giving adequate consideration to women's rights. For example, contractors may build a public facility without, providing for women's washrooms, Things like that. You know, women need changing rooms. They have special needs. You know, in the defense force, in the civil service. You know, I know at one stage when co-education was introduced in 1976, some of the schools did not really cater for having women. Some were boys' schools, like St. Stanislaus and Queen's College were boys' schools. Up to now, I've been to schools quite recently where there are problems with water, and you know, young girls, you know, need proper washrooms. It may sound simple, but the lack of consideration for women's issues, I think, has been problematic. So there needs to be a lot more done in society, in the education system, as you suggest, to teach people in government, teach people in positions of authority, to be more appreciative of the needs of women, not only for representation, but also for normal facilities.
If I could come back to something quickly I mentioned earlier, and that's the Women and Gender Equality Commission. Of course, you did meet with them in 2012. Has there been any decision in terms of APNU probably working along with that commission to address women's needs?
Well, we do have a nominee on that commission, and we have not really been working along, but certainly if there are issues raised by that commission, we are going to cooperate. As I said, we do have a nominee, and we expect that nominee to alert us to any needs that the commission may have. But we are committed entirely to gender equality, and we will continue working inside the PNCR and Partnership for National Unity to ensure that women are treated equitably.
In the final moments of this program, what progress would you like to see be made with opposition contributions, meaning APNU, AFC's contributions, the PPP's contributions, and the contributions of the public? Let's give it a year time span. Where would you like to see the women of our nation? Equality,
total equality, everywhere. Equality in business, equality in the National Assembly, equality in the education system, total equality. Women are equal, and this is, equality, it can't be, you can't compromise that. Equal is equal, 4 is equal, 4, you can't change that.
Brigadier the Honorable David Granger, Opposition Leader and Leader of the People's National Congress Reform. This has been another edition of The Public Interest. I am Malika Ramsey. Thank you very much for watching.